Hello class, welcome to chapter number 2. As biologists, why are we so concerned about chemistry? This is because biological life involves chemical reactions. Everything that we do from digestion to moving a muscle is a series of chemical reactions. In the living world, the smallest level, the simplest level of organization involves chemicals, atoms and molecules. Understanding biology requires some basic knowledge of chemistry. Here is an example of the use of chemistry in biology and society, that is nuclear medicine. All of you must have heard of radiation. Radiation is used in cancer treatment. Radiation uses radioactivity, which is the property of emission of high energy particles. Now, radiation can be used to kill cells. Radiation will kill both cancer cells as well as normal cells. So when we use it for cancer treatment, we expose only a small part of the body and the dosage is very precise. So we try to minimize the killing of normal cells as much as possible. Let's start with some basic chemistry. Definitions of matter and mass. What is matter? Matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. So all of us living beings, our body is made up of matter. What is mass? Mass is the measure of the total amount of material in an object. Another term that you have to remember is element. An element is a substance that cannot be broken down further into other substances by means of chemical reactions. This is the periodic table of elements, which lists all of the naturally occurring and man-made elements. Each element has a symbol derived from its English, Latin or German name. There are 92 elements that occur naturally, and out of these 25 are essential to human beings. Out of these 25, there are 4 elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen, that make up 96% of the human body. There are some elements we call as trace elements, which are required only in very small amounts but are still essential for life. Elements can combine with each other and then they become compounds. So compounds are substances that contain 2 or more elements which are combined with each other in a fixed ratio. This figure shows the chemical composition of the human body. What are the elements that are present and their proportions? This figure depicts the relationship between chemicals and human life. Eating foods rich in iodine, which is a trace element, can prevent a disease called goiter. Goiter involves enlargement of the thyroid gland. Elements are made up of atoms. Each element would be made up of the same kind of atom. So an atom is defined as the smallest unit of matter that still retains all the properties of an element. So if you take the example of an element of oxygen, it would be made up of oxygen atoms. If you could look inside an atom, then an atom is made up of, or it can be further divided into subatomic particles. There are 3 types of subatomic particles which are electrically charged. A proton is positively charged, an electron is negatively charged, while a neutron is electrically neutral. That means it does not have a positive or a negative charge. This figure shows a simplified model of the helium atom. This model shows the subatomic particles in a single helium atom. The electrons move very fast. They create a spherical cloud of negative charge surrounding the central positively charged nucleus, and inside the nucleus we find 2 positively charged protons and 2 neutral neutrons. Any atom of a particular element has the same unique number of protons, and this number is the element's atomic number. So if you take the example of a helium atom, it has 2 protons. Therefore, the atomic number of helium is 2, and no other element has 2 protons. The periodic table lists elements in order of atomic number. Now keep in mind that a standard atom of any element would have the same number of electrons as the number of protons, and therefore the net electrical charge, they would cancel each other and the net electrical charge becomes 0. An atom's mass number or atomic mass is defined as the number of protons and neutrons. So again, for helium, the mass number will be 4 because it's 2 protons plus 2 neutrons. Atoms of the same element will always have the same atomic number, that means the number of protons, but sometimes they may vary in their mass number, that means the number of neutrons becomes different, and these are known as isotopes. That means isotopes would have the same number of protons, but they would have different number of neutrons. A radioactive isotope is that isotope in which the nucleus decays, okay, spontaneously, that means naturally. Let's consider a real life situation. How effective is radiation in treating prostate cancer? What is prostate? Prostate is a walnut-sized gland present in the male reproductive system. In America, prostate cancer is the second most commonly diagnosed cancer among men. The most effective treatment is surgery, total removal of the prostate gland, followed by radiation. So let's consider this option of radioactive seed implantation. In this treatment, small rice grain sized radioactive seeds made up of iodine are implanted or inserted inside the prostate gland very close to the tumor, which slows down or stops the enlargement of tumor. Now the next slide will show you how the results are compared, but this is not a very ideal experiment because the researchers could not have a control or a placebo group in which there were prostate cancer patients in whom the seeds that were inserted were not radioactive in nature, because it would be unethical to withhold treatment from cancer patients. Nevertheless, comparisons with other studies that used different methods such as surgery or external radiation can be made, as shown in figure C. So this tells you how sometimes it's not possible for researchers, they're unable to run experiments properly or without properly controlled groups when human beings are involved. Of the three subatomic particles that we've discussed before, only electrons are directly involved in chemical reactions. Chemical reactions occur when atoms transfer, that means donate or accept or even share electrons, and this transferring or sharing of electron leads to the formation of chemical bonds. The first of the three types of chemical attractions or chemical bonds is an ionic bond. When an atom loses or gains electrons, it becomes positively charged. When it loses an electron, it will become positively charged. If it gains an electron, it becomes negatively charged. And that atom is known as an ion. Now, ionic bonds are formed between oppositely charged ions. That means one of the ion has to be positively charged and the other one has to be negatively charged. And the compounds that are formed by ionic bonds are known as ionic compounds. More commonly, they are known as salts. Step 1 of ionic bonding is electron transfer. When a sodium atom and a chlorine atom meet, one electron is transferred from sodium to chlorine, and this results in two ions with opposite charges. The attraction between the ions, the positively charged sodium ion and the negatively charged chloride ion, holds the ions together as a single compound, and the compound that is formed is sodium chloride or NaCl. The second type of chemical bonds is known as a covalent bond. A covalent bond is formed when two atoms share one or more pairs of electrons. So there is no loss or gain of electrons, they are simply sharing. Covalent bonds are the strongest of the chemical bonds and they hold atoms together, forming a molecule. This figure depicts alternative ways to represent a molecule. The third type of chemical bonds is a hydrogen bond, and the easiest way to understand hydrogen bonding is by considering a molecule of water, H2O. Now if you see the chemical formula, H2O means water. It is made up of two hydrogen atoms and these are joined to one oxygen atom, and the joining is by means of covalent bonds. Now if you remember, covalent bond means sharing of electrons. Now what happens here is that the electrons are not shared equally between oxygen and the hydrogen atoms. This causes the water molecule to have an uneven distribution of charge, and the water molecule is said to be polar molecule because of the uneven sharing. And this polarity causes one water molecule to get electrically attracted to a neighboring second water molecule, and then these two are also attracted to a third neighboring water molecule, and this attraction forms hydrogen bonds between the neighboring or the adjacent water molecules. The dotted lines show hydrogen bonding between neighboring water molecules. Chemical reactions rearrange matter by breaking bonds in the starting materials known as reactants and forming new bonds in the end materials called products. Think of a chemical reaction, and which major theme do you think is being illustrated by this action? A hint is pathways that transform energy and matter. So rearrangement of molecules within cells is an example of matter being transformed. Water is life. The cells in our body are composed of 70 to 95% water. Earth is habitable because it has so much water. The sticking together of water molecules is essential to life. This property is known as cohesion, and it occurs due to hydrogen bonding. Water moderates temperature by absorbing heat in warm environments and releasing heat in cold environments. Evaporative cooling also helps stabilize the temperature of oceans and organisms. Water absorbs heat when hydrogen bonds are broken. On the other hand, when water cools, hydrogen bonds are formed, and this process releases heat. Sweating is an example of evaporative cooling by the body. It helps to maintain the body temperature, and the body stays in homeostasis. Ice floats because it is less dense than liquid water, and the insulating properties of floating ice prevent the oceans from freezing solid. Water is a very good solvent, dissolving a great variety of solutes to produce aqueous solutions. Now answer this question. Which major theme is illustrated by the action of the polarity of water molecules explaining water's ability to support life? A hint here, the relationship between structure and function. The polar structure of a water molecule helps enable it to carry out the function of supporting life. This slide has a few important definitions that you have to memorize. What is an acid, a base, what is the pH scale, and what do you mean by buffers? An acid is a proton donor. That means it's a chemical compound that releases a hydrogen ion or a proton to a solution. A base, on the other hand, is what accepts a hydrogen ion and removes it from the solution. pH scale is a measure of the hydrogen ion, which is H positive, concentration in a solution. Buffers, we have buffers in our body, they minimize the changes in pH. This is a pH scale. A solution having a pH of 7 is considered neutral, meaning that its hydrogen and hydroxide ion concentrations are equal. An example would be pure water. The lower the pH below 7, the more acidic the solution, or the greater its excess of hydrogen ion compared with the hydroxide ions. The higher the pH above 7, the more basic or alkaline the solution, or the greater the deficiency of hydrogen ions relative to hydroxide ions. This figure illustrates the ocean acidification by atmospheric carbon dioxide. After dissolving in seawater, carbon dioxide or CO2 reacts to form carbonic acid. This acid then undergoes further chemical reactions that disrupt coral growth. Such acidification can cause drastic changes in important marine ecosystems. What is the major theme illustrated by this action? A hint is its interactions with biological systems. Since there are interactions between the atmosphere and ocean, release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere can affect ocean life. Radiation has its pros and cons. It can be harmful when uncontrolled, but it can also be useful in medicine. Another important use of radiation is in estimating age of fossils or getting data on the evolutionary history of life forms on Earth. A technique called radiometric dating is used, which is based on the decay of radioactive isotopes and the concept of half-life. Age is estimated by measuring the ratio of two isotopes to learn how many half-life reductions have occurred since it died. These help us to create reliable chronological records of life. This figure illustrates the technique of radiometric dating. Living organisms incorporate the carbon-14 isotope, represented here with the blue dots, but no new carbon-14 is introduced once an organism dies, and the carbon-14 that remains slowly decays into carbon-12. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 in a fossil, scientists can estimate its age.